Over the past month, my son Stephen and I have been studying the Old Testament scriptures, particularly the promises of the Messiah, the long-for Messiah. What really got me excited about doing this study was when I was thinking about the story of the two disciples headed on their way to Emmaus. That story is in Luke chapter 24. And this is how the story went. Luke chapter 24, verse 13. On actually the day of Jesus' resurrection, two disciples were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them, but God kept them from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?" They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, "You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened here the last few days." "What things?" Jesus asked. "The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth," they said. "He was a prophet who did powerful miracles, and he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped that he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago." Then some women from our group of his followers were at the tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said that his body was missing, and that they had seen angels who told them Jesus is alive. Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory?" Then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. By this time they were nearing Emmaus, and at the end of their journey Jesus acted as if he were going on, but they begged him, "Stay the night with us, since it is getting late." So he went home with them. As they sat down to eat, he took the bread and blessed it and then broke it and gave it to them. Suddenly their eyes were opened and they recognized him. At that moment he disappeared. They said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" What an amazing story. I think that's one of the most amazing stories in the whole Bible. Jesus appearing to two of his disciples who were incredibly disappointed and discouraged, yet maybe tiny bits of hope that perhaps Jesus was alive. But Jesus rebuked them and said, "How foolish you are, how slow to believe all that the prophets have told." And then to think that Jesus took them through a survey of the scriptures and told about himself. Of course, he didn't have a Bible with him, probably. He didn't have a scroll. They weren't opening a scroll. But Jesus was presenting the words of Scripture and explaining it to them. What an amazing, amazing study that must have been. And so it got me thinking, would there be anything more appropriate for the Christmas season than to review the writings of Moses and all the prophets and David, to see what Jesus might have presented to his disciples? We as Christians, followers of Jesus, shouldn't we know those scriptures that foretold about the Messiah? And what I found coming into this Christmas season was that the excitement of Jesus' birth has been greater for me than ever before. because it was like the long-promised Messiah, who I've been reading about, had finally come. It was interesting, in Luke 24, it goes along farther than that, and Jesus actually appeared to the two disciples that were on the road to Emmaus after they got back to Jerusalem and told the other disciples about their experience. Suddenly Jesus appeared in the room. And what I've always remembered from that story was the encounter with Thomas, that Thomas wouldn't believe that that was really Jesus. And so Jesus said, "Here, see my hands, touch the scars." But one of the things that Jesus repeated in that scripture was that he went back and retaught all the disciples and gave them the same or a similar study that he had given the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. So here it is. Jesus appears to all of his disciples. Then the two men from Emmaus told their story of how Jesus had appeared to them and as they were walking along the road, and how they had recognized him as he was breaking the bread. And just as they were telling about it, Jesus himself suddenly was standing there amongst them. "Peace be with you." Of course, the whole group was startled and full of fear. They thought he was a ghost. And then he had him. He ate in front of them. But then once again, Jesus says, "When I was with you before, I told you that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and in the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, and he said, "Yes, it was written long ago that the Messiah would suffer and die and rise from the dead on the third day." So once again, Jesus opened their mind to the scriptures and reminded them of what had been told in the books of Moses, in the prophets, and in the Psalms.